In this lecture, we're going to start talking about the grading process that you're going to use to get through Project 1. We're going to break this down into 3 separate ideas and 3 separate lectures. We're going to talk about the idea of analysis, a concept, and then a final drawing. This lecture is going to focus on the analysis. The analysis is for you to understand the site. And by understanding the site, you want to also identify potential trouble areas, learn some of the constraints, and identify some priorities that you're going to need for developing a concept. In the second lecture, we're going to help you develop a concept, and this is probably the most important part of learning to grade, because this is where you're going to learn to visualize the site, see some of the basic landform patterns, sketch in your contour lines, and test priority areas with spot elevations and trial slopes. The final step in developing a grading plan is the actual final drawing. This is something that the contractor will use to actually build the site. So in this, you will need to test your spot elevations, and your slopes, to see if they work and refine it until the whole site works. There really isn't a lecture that can cover that. We are going to be covering that with our reviews as we go through the process. But right now we want to start with an analysis. And these are some really basic questions that you want to ask yourself. What is there now in terms of the physical conditions? What will be there in terms of the site program, such as a building, a driveway, a patio, etc.? And what are the site conditions as they're set? In other words, what gives you the flexible areas and what areas are not flexible? Now, when you're starting with a simple site plan like this analysis might really seem like overkill for you, but actually what we're trying to do is train you to work on more complex site designs later on. So for example, you can see this is a much more complicated site. We've got forested areas down here that have to be preserved. We have parking that's at 2 different levels. We have buildings around the outside. We have adjacent uses. We have to consider all of those things as part of the analysis for the site. But for now, we're going to start with some very simple ideas. So again, we're going to start with what is there now. And we've talked about this with you before. And it's actually a fairly simple process, but it's an important process to go through because what is there now is going to restrain, control, and guide the design that you're going to be doing as you're trying to grade this site. So as we have already discussed, you have some things such as the limit of work going around the outside of the site. You have existing trees that you want to preserve, and you have your roadway connection. So you have a lot of limits going around the outside, and you have a fixed point here that you have to hit as part of this design. So this is part of the what is there now question. Another critical part of what is there now is you need to analyze where the water flows. So in this case, we have water flowing in towards the center from all sides, and then the water before the house is built is running right down the center of the site. So you can see this creates a perfectly natural conflict because you've got a building right in the middle of where the water is going to go. So you need to come up with a system for resolving that. Another thing you're going to want to look at very quickly is where are the existing steep slopes and where do you need the flat areas to be, or are there any flat areas on site? These are all issues that you want to address and take a look at right as you start the process because they are going to help guide the grading design that you're going to create. The next thing we want to look at is what is going to be there. So we're going to have a house there, we're going to have a walkway, and we're going to have a driveway. How do those things impact the design? So for example, we know that we want water to run away from the house on all sides, and that water will probably run down the front. We also know that this driveway is a critical connection because we have a point down at the bottom, at the right-of-way, that we have to meet that elevation, and that's going to determine some of the flexibility that we have in terms of the elevation that we set for the house. And we're going to use that knowledge to start to think about some of the slopes that we have. The first one we're probably always going to think about is what sort of slope is allowed on the driveway. We generally don't want anything less than 2%. We'd rather not have it more than 5%, but in the absolute max, we certainly don't want it anywhere close to 10% if we can avoid it. We also have the side slopes running away from the house and the side slopes running towards the house, the back slope and the front slope. All of these have minimum and maximums that we have given to you into the assignment, and you need to be aware of how those are going to impact your design. So the information from this analysis is what you want to use to set your priorities. And what I mean by priorities is what do you work on first? And to be truthful, the first thing you should be working on in this case is the driveway. You want to figure out if I had that driveway at a 2%, what would the finished floor elevation be? And if I had it all the way up to say 10%, what would it be? And I'd also do another quick calculation at 5%. That gives you 3 different options for your finished floor elevation. And I know at first you're thinking 3 different options, that's horrible. How am I going to do all that math? But the fact is you have to consider all the options when you're doing this. Once you have those 3 different finished floor elevations, then you work your way back out like you did when you did the previous exercise and run your swales around. And you will find out what works best. Is the 2% driveway working for the swales, the 5% driveway, or the 10% driveway working for the swales? So that becomes an iterative process, but before you can really undertake that, you have to start by doing the analysis to figure out what are the priorities for the design. So again, this lecture is just talking about the analysis. This is a process that many people want to skip early on, but we really have to tell you it is not something that you should skip. You really need to draw this out. You draw it out by hand, draw it out by AutoCAD, it doesn't really matter, but you need to do that analysis. In the next lecture, we're going to start to talk to you more about developing your concept for this.